the 4-day emperor who lost everything before he even unpacked. Imagine seizing the throne of the most powerful empire in Europe, only to be exiled before you could even decorate your quarters. This is the story of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, better known as Napoleon III, and his short-lived successor, the man history remembers as the 4-day emperor. A man who, for 4 days, held the fate of France in his hands, before it all unraveled spectacularly. In 1870, France stood at a dangerous crossroads. Napoleon III, nephew of the legendary Napoleon Bonaparte, had dragged the country into the disastrous Franco-Prussian War. After a crushing defeat at the Battle of Sedan, Napoleon III was captured by Prussian forces. Panic swept through Paris. The emperor was gone and the empire was in chaos. In a desperate attempt to salvage legitimacy, imperial loyalists turned to his heir, Louis Napoleon, Prince Imperial, just 14 years old. But the man offered the throne in this moment of crisis was not the young prince himself, but Louis-Jérôme Bonaparte, a distant relative and figurehead. And it is here that our strange tale begins. Louis-Jérôme Bonaparte was named Provisional Emperor by Bonapartist loyalists in the southern city of Toulouse on September 4, 1870. But the timing couldn't have been worse. As Paris erupted in revolution, the Third Republic was proclaimed that same day. The crowds stormed the Tuileries Palace, tearing down imperial symbols and burning portraits of Napoleon III. In Toulouse, the self-declared emperor had barely changed clothes. His authority existed on paper, and only for a fleeting moment. By September 8th, just 4 days later, Louis-Jérôme's claim was rescinded under pressure from both Republicans and even some royalists. He stepped down without resistance. His imperial reign, if one can call it that, had lasted less than a week. Louis-Jérôme quietly retreated from public life. He didn't fight for the throne. He issued no proclamations. There was no final stand. In fact, historians debate whether he truly accepted the title at all, or whether it was thrust upon him by desperate loyalists grasping at symbols. Regardless, his name entered history, not as a ruler but as a footnote, a man who was emperor in name only for a mere 4 days. He would die years later in relative obscurity, remembered less for who he was and more for how briefly he wasn't allowed to be. To understand this strange episode, one must consider the gravity of the name Bonaparte. After Napoleon I conquered Europe and Napoleon III rebuilt France's imperial ambition, the Bonaparte name still carried enormous weight, enough to terrify monarchs and inspire uprisings. But by 1870, it was also a relic. Louis-Jérôme's brief elevation was not an act of grandeur, but of desperation, a last gasp of a dying regime. He became a symbol not of power, but of powerlessness. Today, the 4-day emperor is largely forgotten, a ghost between dynasties. He ruled no armies, passed no laws, and issued no decrees. Yet his story reminds us how quickly the tides of history can turn. In just 4 days, the last ember of Bonapartist rule in France flickered and died. It's a cautionary tale of ambition, legacy, and the unforgiving speed of revolution. He was emperor before he even unpacked. And by the time he realized it, it was already over. Don't miss our next story about the ruler who lived longer in exile than on the throne. Subscribe for more hidden chapters from the past brought to life.